Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you're dialing in from. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kevin O'Hara, the Executive Director of Forest Plus, powered by American Forest and formerly the 1T.org US chapter. And we're really excited to have a phenomenal group of experts on the ground and in Washington and across the country to talk about what is the biggest threat to our forests and our forested landscapes in the country, which is the wildfire crisis. And our goal today is to kind of approach this from federal level to state level to community level with bringing in different perspectives, and then dive in a little deeper on how utilities are becoming a really critical and essential partners in building landscape scale resilience. But before we go that, we're going to jump in and start with kind of framing the crisis and with three experts who have been on the front lines of this in different scales in different places. Hillary Franz, who is the new president and CEO of American Forest. We're thrilled to have Hillary on leading our team. Hillary is the former Public Lands Commissioner for the state of Washington and brings deep experience in wildfire management and for reforestation, everything from sort of detection to reforestation. Jenny Biggs from the Moore Foundation, who has been a real national leader and catalyst in putting resources and innovation into the wildfire space. And finally, Matt Weiner from Megafire Action, who is leading the nation's leading coalition on using federal policy and state policy to drive action to address the wildfire crisis. So really lucky to have this group here today. And we're going to jump right in for the first question for the first panelist, and we're going to start with Hillary. And just asking you to talk a little bit about your leadership at Washington DNR, how you built the robust fire detection, suppression, and forest restoration and reforestation programs, and some of those lessons that you've learned as a leader at the state level, and how you're going to translate that to addressing this crisis nationally. So thanks, Hillary.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here and also with a number of my friends from Matt and Jenny. I'll start. I think Washington gives an example, I think, of hope to so many states. Not every state is like California with the budget like California, and not necessarily also the significant wildfire challenges. But Washington State was facing a growing wildfire crisis, a growing forest health crisis back when I first stepped in the role in 2017, but really with no strategy or plan of how to get out of it or begin to take a reactive and a proactive approach. We had zero in our budget for forest health and restoration and reforestation. We had zero in our budget for wildfire. We had 8 Vietnam War helicopters and 40 full-time firefighters. And within just 8 years, we've become a national and international model for how states and communities can be addressing this crisis. First, just on the reactive wildfire, it's very much the case that we have to be putting strategies in place that look at early detection, knowing when the fires are, when they're going to hit. Putting in place initial attack, which is one of the first things we did with actually no money, so that we were taking decisive action to keep these fires small where they are close to communities and have huge risks. And so that we weren't fighting so many fires at the same time. Leveraging our aviation resources and also saying we're not going to go it alone. I mean, we know that we can't just rely on the federal government. And that, I think, has been largely the big context is every state has been, oh, the feds will be there when we need it. Unfortunately, the funding, the investments, and the strategy that's keeping up with the changing climate, the conditions of our forests, that investment hasn't been there. And Washington State and Oregon and California have had to learn the hard way. And I think it's an important opportunity for the rest of the country to say, here's how states are going to have to be building that capacity and resource and wildfire response, and how states should be partnering more together too, as our seasons aren't necessarily always lined. On the forest restoration and reforestation side, I think wildfire was one where we react, we hope that it's not going to be a bad year, and it's a bad year. It no longer is the case that we are given the gift of not having a bad wildfire season. And we knew we would run from one fire to the next and never really be able to get at the root cause of this issue, which is that our forests throughout our country are dying on federal, state, tribal, and private lands. We are already decades behind in that work, and that we can actually make progress. Some people say we can't do it. Just let it burn. There's no way we can get to it. I disagree. I don't think we have that choice, nor should we give up that easily. And what I say is we have to move at the pace and scale on our forest restoration work at the pace and scale of wildfire. And that means actually working across jurisdictional boundaries. At Washington State, we set up a 20-year forest health plan. I had no one to do that work and no money, but we knew we didn't have a choice. And within 7 years, we restored 1 million acres across federal, state, tribal, and private lands. We've made regulatory changes, statutory changes. We've made new investments and innovation, and we built a workforce that is able to sort of rise to it. We still have a long ways to go, but it has been clear that 95% of our fires kept to below 10 acres in the last 5 years. In addition to that, we are seeing where forests are actually responding in a healthy way of not leading to these more catastrophic fires in those landscapes that we've gotten in and treated.
Yeah, really impressive body of work and a lot of lessons to learn that we're excited to help export. Jenny, can you talk a little bit about More Foundation and your work and leadership in this space, maybe by helping us frame the crisis, and then talk about the work and your leadership in sort of identifying and lifting up innovation that maybe is going to give us some more hope, and to Hillary's point on confronting this crisis.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and it's such a pleasure to be with this group and with all of you. It's fun to see the notes popping in the chat. I appreciate the question. The scale of the challenge that we are facing is not small, but I also really want to make it clear that the opportunities are not small either. And I think this group knows that extreme wildfires are on the rise. Globally, frequency and magnitude have doubled in the last 20 years. That trend is expected to continue. We've seen projections for a 30% increase in the risk of these extreme wildfire events by 2050, 50% by 2100. And often the destruction that we're seeing is because of increasing fire speed. And we know that the average peak daily growth rates for these fast fires in the West have also more than doubled in the last 20 years. So the scale that confronts us is big and growing, but so are the opportunities. And this is absolutely a solvable challenge. And that's the message that I hope that everyone walks away and is able to take. Partly, I think that is thanks to innovation, Kevin, as you were teeing up. Tech innovation is going to be an important part of what's needed to catch up to and get in front of these future fires. I think of the trove of new globally consistent data and data streams that the FireSat mission and Earth Fire Alliance is going to be delivering. And that'll help us maximize ecologically beneficial fire. More fire that we know is coming anyway, if we can turn that itself into an opportunity and also reduce detrimental fire. I also think about the modeling that's emerging and available now for prioritizing landscape stewardship and community mitigations, work that Hussam Mahmood and Michael Gallner are doing in the built environment, or groups like Planscape and Vibrant Planet that are delivering solutions for large land managers, or Xyloplan for agencies working to identify and prioritize those mitigations that really matter most to disrupt the fire pathways into and within communities. And then for prescribed burns and scaling those up, I think about the modeling opportunities through solutions like Burn Pro 3D and actually implementing with BurnBot. So lots in that tech innovation space that I think is good reason for hope, but it's also other kinds of innovation. Innovative, creative ideas around behavioral science. And I think they're about fireside and the way that they're testing what's actually moving people to open their home inspection reports and then actually act on those and what we're learning from that. And then innovative finance. And Elvie and Kevin are going to talk more about those connections with utilities here. I think many of you know about the work that Blue Forest is doing. So I believe innovation can help us meet the scale and the pace of this challenge and will be key to sustaining those solutions too. But maybe the biggest opportunity, and the reason that I so appreciate these conversations, that opportunity, I think is really more just about good old-fashioned relationships and trust. And it's about people and shared purpose and aligned vision. And what I see is that people are willing to work together around fire in a way that I don't often see elsewhere. And these connections and collaborations within and across sectors, it is so inspiring to see them take shape and even more inspiring to see what they're actually delivering. So yeah, I'd say we have these opportunities in innovation that can really fuel us for the speed and the distance that we have to go, but also in the people, in the communities, and sometimes even the unlikely allies who are banding together to drive that progress faster and further than anyone could alone.
Here, and I think a perfect segue to our next leader, Matt Weiner, who's been leading the charge on Capitol Hill and bringing together some of these what you could call strange bedfellows who are united by a desire that we can and should confront this crisis head on. Matt, talk a little bit about Megafire and some of the things you all have been working on, and frankly, some of the huge wins that you've seen coming over the last couple months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say, it's so cool for me to be on a call with leaders like Hillary and Jenny, who have been such tremendous community builders around embracing this environment for innovation. And I love how Jenny framed the innovation piece, because it's not just about technology, as a lot of people think it is. It's really about changing the way we're approaching a problem that our systems are just not prepared to solve, right? And so that's influenced a lot of our thinking as well. So about 3 years ago, I founded Megafire Action. We are a nonprofit organization focused solely on enacting policy solutions to catastrophic wildfire. We started at the federal level. Now we've recently expanded into California as well, and hope to take a look at helping in other states as we continue to grow. But the quick origin story on that is that I worked in Capitol Hill before this, and I was never a wildfire guy. I didn't think I would be a wildfire guy. I grew up in Topanga Canyon, California, lots of wildfire growing up. And then as I was representing the state of California as ED of their delegation, fire was taking up more and more of my time with each passing year. And I felt that there was no entity on the outside solely focused on helping us get these problems across the finish line, or the solutions across the finish line, I should say. So, in the way we sometimes talk about random acts of mitigation in the field, we were seeing kind of random acts of legislation and no strategic vision of where we need to go. And so we decided to start Megafire Action to drive that. And one of the biggest drivers of that for us was that you uh, the the partisanship in DC on something like wildfire is not fully baked. This isn't like working on something like gun control or healthcare, where positions have been pretty set for a long time. It's very malleable. And as we look towards solutions in the future, it's even more malleable when there's all kinds of bedfellows we can create. And our theory of change has been that the parties have been getting closer together on a lot of the solutions that we need for a long time now. And what they needed was a little push and a little trust building to help start getting the machine kind of revved up and going on the policy front. So to talk a little bit about federal, we're really focused on a bill right now called the Fix Our Forest Act, which would be the most comprehensive change to the way we manage federal lands in a generation. That bill is largely a planning and permitting bill now, through a lot of good work from our partners, is also very heavily focused on technology and innovation as well. So what it would do is reform the processes by which the Forest Service plans to do forest treatment projects. And for those on the call who aren't familiar with wildfire like we are, this is a problem of our own making. And this is something that inspires me about it is we've created this problem, and unlike a lot of other climate-driven disasters, we are uniquely situated to get out of this problem. We have the agency to do this. It doesn't require solving all of climate change. We can act now, and it will actually be better for the climate overall. And I think that's a really important point to stress. And when I say it's a problem of our own making, it's that we took fire out of ecosystems that need it to thrive. And then we built in communities that are meant to build without designing our structures to withstand that, right? And to be resilient to that. And so we're looking to policies that can help us both deal with the landscape side and bring fire severity down, right? The balance of fire severity is as big of a problem as more acres burn. It's everything's going to burn. It's all going to burn, and the question is to what effect to humans, the health and our to human health, structures, and our climate and ecosystems, right? And so we dived into this bill. We got it out of the House last year, and it died in the Senate. Then again out of the House this year, just marked up in the Senate on a very strong bipartisan vote. And now we're looking to get it on the Senate floor. And it looks to be one of the more promising bipartisan bills to potentially get to President Trump's desk in the near future here. And I can pause there, and we can get into it more later if you have any questions.
No, brilliant. And again, building on kind of this systems level thinking, which I think is, I think a common denominator of each of your comments of that this is going to take a multi-sectoral, multi-level of government approach with innovative new partners like we're about to hear from. But when you all think about this systems change level things, what are, I guess, one or two things that give you from a policy perspective, from an innovation perspective, from a partnership perspective, or a financing perspective? Pick a couple that are saying, God, this is really going to move the needle.
Do you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, please.
Well, so I have a lot, and partly, sorry, that's just I've been eating, breathing, sleeping fire. And I first want to say, like Matt, I'm with you. Like I didn't know anything about fire, and all of a sudden I'm leading a wildfire agency at like time. And I always tell people, I mean, my kids would tell you I couldn't even put out a kitchen fire, and all of a sudden I'm supposed to make sure the state of Washington doesn't burn down. But I actually think that is what was so significant. What makes me so excited is you have new people stepping into a space that has been long challenged area. Like, I mean, American forest got started 150 years ago because one of the greatest threats to forest in America was wildfire. So, it's an old, long-standing tradition about wildfire and fighting wildfire. And you have new people staying in the space that, as Jenny pointed out, new innovation and technologies like the Silicon Valley, and I got a Washington State, Googles and Microsofts and everybody have all of a sudden engaged in an old, long-standing system, and they are challenging the old ways of doing things. And I'll just say, having come from local and state government, challenging the old way of doing things is a really good thing. And government being challenged, right? You also have a context where we're bridging the wildlands area, right? That natural landscape of forest management, right? And sort of a sometimes let it burn approach to all of a sudden a conflict with urban environments, right? And that new technology, like what Jenny pointed out, fireside, of saying, look, we've got to have ownership at the home level, at the neighborhood level, at the urban level, xyloplan and vibrant planning, giving the tools so those fire districts are saying, I'm trying to prevent it from burning in the off season, right? Okay, what are the things I can do? I think another context is that federal, state, and tribal and local governments. You guys might think that local, state, and federal government loves working together and we do it beautifully. No, we're just barely trying to just keep everything going as best we can. And integration and working together is hard. But the fact is, in wildfire, because it moves across our landscapes and becomes all of our challenges, from the moment it starts, federal, state, tribal, and local governments and the private sector with tech, and it's great to see Kevin on utilities and insurance, are saying we all have to own this problem and be part of the solution to working together to accelerate policy, practices, projects, and financing. And then I'll just say my last point, again, sort of coming from the government context, government at all scales is struggling with, everything is a crisis: homelessness and housing, education, transportation, budget deficits, the list goes on. Wildfire, in a way, gives us an urgency. Like, it is a nonstop, constant urgency. You see the fire, you got to put it out. You can't just watch it burn, right? Because it's going to get bad. And what it's done is brought this group together across all these sectors to say, enough is enough. We got to take control of this issue, and we can't ignore the crisis in front of us. And I think that urgency, while it's threatening and life threatening, it does get action, and which is great to see with the people who are just on this, as well as the people who are at Red Sky. It's a phenomenal moment, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I've never felt more hopeful than I do right now.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that quickly, Hillary, because you're absolutely right about the urgency, but there are a lot of really urgent, pressing needs at the policy level that don't garner any action or movement, right? And what is different about this is you have these new thinkers, you have these new solution sets, and you have this drive to do something about the problem, and this growing awareness that we do have agency, and therefore we need to demand that our policymakers use that agency, right? And so you need to see that fire burning and that urgency of, oh my God, this is going to basically, destroy the American West as we know it if we don't get a handle on that. But you also need that paired with this vision of optimism. So I was really glad you hit on that. I have a long list of things too. I could go on all day about the things I'd love to see. I mean, we all talk about funding. We need to do a much better job of investing in our federal and non-federal workforce on this front. But I think if there were two things I could have to get started on that conversation, one, first and foremost, is better holistic risk assessment to drive policy and decision making. There's no entity right now responsible for tracking risk and assessing risk across landscapes and jurisdictions. That's something we're trying to address with the creation of Intelligence Center in the Fix Our Forest Act. But that creates a huge problem from a prioritization standpoint in terms of deciding where our resources should go, and also from an accountability standpoint. Very few people even know what kind of work is happening on the ground on federal land in particular, and in a lot of states as well. So to me, that's critical. It's a critical enabling condition, and the technology is here to do this pretty well. We're just not deploying it. So that's a really critical enabling condition to get us moving in the right direction at every level, whether that's at the parcel level, the community level, or at the landscape level, right? And then the other piece is we have a huge upfront capital problem. These are investments at every level that cost a lot upfront and then less to maintain going on. And we all see the value proposition. The ROI on these figures is through the roof. Vibrant Planet recently did a good analysis of some of the potential ROI of fuels treatments in strategic areas, where the numbers were so shocking we had to go back a couple times and make sure the math was right because it just seemed like it was too good. And it was, right? And it was accurate, I should say. And so, to me, that, and then when you look at the built environment, you may be able to one day get insurance savings from making the right retrofits in your community, even in a world with more fire. But paying $30,000 to $50,000 up front to do that for an existing structure is going to be really challenging. And so we're spending a lot of time focusing on that problem too. How do we amortize those costs over time and find ways to move forward? And that's one of the areas where I'm really excited about some of the innovative thinking happening.
Love
I'd
it.
jump in and add just a couple of
Please.
things too, if I can. Just to the point that Hillary made about new people jumping into the space, and Matt, I think that the random acts of mitigation, I'd also add random acts of innovation. This idea, I think all of the energy and attention that we're seeing on this issue can be promising. I do derive so much hope from it, but I would also add only if it's harnessed productively and tapping it usefully and making sure that it really isn't all adding up to just entropy and chaos. And I don't think that's where we're headed, but I think we need to make sure that that isn't the case by ensuring that really bright ideas are developed iteratively with the intended end users and intended community beneficiaries, not in silos that also run the risk of duplication of effort. And so we need to make sure that we also have those clear pathways to adoption and scale from earlier on in the process. And I'd point earlier this month we saw the launch of fireworks, and I would just emphasize that as something that really does aim to close this gap between creative ideas and the front lines and the end users across all stages of fire management. And so that's one specific way that I see this gap being bridged, and it's a really important one to make sure that we keep our eye on.
Totally agree. And I think a perfect segue into kind of how we've got some really innovative partners in the private sector who are thinking about this. Utilities have been mentioned earlier, but from a water and an electric utility perspective, some really phenomenal work that's being led on the ground by two of the the leaders in that space that are here with us today, Kevin Johnson from Pacific Gas and Electric and Alvy Barton from the Salt River Project. So we wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about these system change things, the big picture stuff that Hillary, Matt, and Jenny have laid out, and talk about how this looks on the ground, how innovation, how partnerships, how using tech in different ways and using finance in new and innovative ways actually looks through the perspective of these innovative companies. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Johnson from PG&E to talk a little bit about your work, and then turn it over to Alvy to talk a little bit about your work, and then we're going to open it up to you all for questions, answers, dialogue, and conversation. Kevin, thanks for being with us. Appreciate you. And great to see you on the ground the other week.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you for having me. This is a great group. I can't believe I get to be a part of it. So we, PG&E, has a long history with fire, no secret. And so we've, really have a lot to lose as a company and as a state if the problem continues as it has. PG&E has been investing quite a lot in reducing the likelihood of ignition from our equipment turning into big fires. And so leaning very heavily into things like turning the power off during dangerous conditions, undergrounding wire, doing overhead hardening, building microgrids, doing system inspections, a lot of different things, but and really spent a lot of money. It's hard to wrap your arms around how much the utility industry spends on infrastructure, but you say roughly $30 billion on that focus area in the last 7-8 years. I think we're now, realizing that we believe we've made a good amount of progress actually in reducing our risk of big fires from our wires. Always, much more to do, but now I think broadening the aperture of our strategy as we mature. And so another piece is what we call ignition containment, where basically we've found that a lot of fires from utilities or sparks come from a certain radius around poles and around distribution towers. And so if we kind of can contain, and also with situational awareness, et cetera, contain fires to not become very big, that's another strategy beyond simply preventing the spark and ignition. And then the last piece that we're kind of the third pillar now is, can we also help make our communities become resilient? Both because it reduces the risk of PG&E and liability, but also because it's not good for us or for anybody for these big fires to knock out of town, even if it wasn't a power line that started it. And so I think it's something that we can lean into and is good for us and is good for everybody to do. And so that ties into this topic of forestry and other resilience activities too. So I think what I'll do is just share one slide, just 'cause it's easier for me to provide a visual than to describe everything on my own. If I can pull it off. Yeah, let's go for it. Here we go. So this is just a sample of basically projects that we've been piloting, kind of frameworks or business approaches where utilities can start to lean into this more holistic risk reduction. And so these are things that we've been piloting the last 2.5 years. That's gone very well, and where I think we're positioned now to start scaling as we start to take on even more potential programmatic areas where we can lean into. So one is around wood management, and this ties very closely to forest management. When you do forest management, there's a lot of wood left over. Are there cheaper, more cost-effective ways where the wood does need to be managed to manage that wood? Say converting it to biochar, avoiding long truck miles. There are a lot of potential areas for innovation there. And then forest management. This is again, that idea of healthy forests mean reduced fire risk. It takes proactive work, especially that upfront, I don't know if capital is the right word, but upfront spend to get that done. And so can we, and also you don't need to treat the entire forest. You could theoretically do, a mosaic treatment of, treating 30% of the forest could reduce likelihood of catastrophic outcomes for, a much bigger area. So are there things that the utility can do to co-invest where we get value too, to help catalyze those kind of big treatments? And if it's farther away from our wires, maybe we're not probably going to pay for all of it, but we can play kind of a catalytic role, provide flexible financing through something like Blue Forest, or other kind of creative, matching funding for grants, that kind of thing. We also do have a rapid response, kind of loaning helicopters out to basically partner counties when there's fires for better response. But also things like dip tanks in areas where there's not that much water. we can provide these dip tanks that can be plumbed that basically can dramatically shorten the trips helicopters have to take to fight a fire, which effectively pays itself off in the first few hours of helicopters using it. Also, roadside brushing, basically treating along roads that might be one way in, one way out, or where there's, roadsides are the key ignition source. And it doesn't cost that much. You can do a lot of it, and it reduces the risk from our power lines, but also helps get people out from an emergency and save fire trucks in. Also doing fuel breaks, we can do kind of defensive rings around communities to help protect them. And it's leaving a lot of the trees in place, but reducing a lot of understory fuel and returning the land to kind of what it looked like before European arrival, at least out here in the West. And then also even capacity building in areas where maybe there aren't groups to quickly respond to a fire, or to do the preventative work that'd be very useful when there's not a fire. Trying to seed some of that infrastructure and resources in areas that really need it, and where I think we all stand to benefit from having those capacity in the places that really need it. So a lot of this is, we're actually doing this through grants. Typically, utilities spend money on actually doing the work ourselves, and sending out contractors or teams to do work. This is really the idea, is we are investing where communities are helping themselves in a way that also helps the utility and the grid. We provide grants or other kind of support to enable those groups to get farther faster. So we can all kind of de-risk that together. And the goal is to just buy down a lot of risk, at a more landscape scale, where it's a great deal for our customers, and where we're creating that bigger good that we all want and need. So that's kind of where we've been dabbling. It's an expansion of the electric utility business model, but it's one I think that has a lot of validity to it. We've done cost effectiveness analysis on this, and it especially when we can crowd in other people's dollars too, and really collaborate. It's a really strong benefit cost ratio and investment from a utility perspective, but outside of our lane of traditional infrastructure investment. So it's a new muscle for us to build, but one I think is really promising and exciting from all the returns from our pilot so far. So we're looking to scale. The last thing I would say is, now I think there's also an emphasis that we're looking at now is, could we collaborate, say, around cities, or especially even counties, and start to take all these disparate tool sets, random acts of mitigation, stitch them into a whole that really makes sense in collaboration with a lot of our partners and governments and customers and communities. And so I think that's kind of where the rubber's really going to hit the road. Can we better optimize, as Matt was talking about, and deploy this arsenal, in a way that makes the most sense, so we're all driving down the risks, as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. So I will yield there. Thank you.
Yeah, phenomenal work, Kevin. I really like the idea of thinking at at a more holistic landscape scale, and connecting, meeting people where they are in their sort of fire journey, from their from the 5 feet around their house all the way out to the forests that are providing clean air, clean water, and other benefits hundreds of miles away. That's where I think LV comes in, because they've been doing some really phenomenal work in at the watershed level with the Salt River Project. So LV, I want to turn it over to you to walk us through some of the really cool work that you're leading.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin, for having us today. So at Salt River Project, I lead all of our forest health initiatives. And for those who may not be familiar with Salt River Project, or SRP, we're a power and water provider here in the Phoenix metropolitan area, where we serve over 2 million customers every single day. And the biggest piece about this is that the water we provide to our customers comes from 8.3 million acres across northern, central, and eastern Arizona. So the watersheds stretch up towards the Grand Canyon, all the way over to almost the New Mexico border. And the snow and rain that falls on those watersheds then flows down into 2 main rivers, and 7 reservoirs, of which SRP manage those reservoirs on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation. About 20 years ago, we started noticing that one of the greatest risks to our water supply and the water infrastructure needed to serve our customers, that the greatest risk was really this threat of high severity wildfire, not only impacting directly the water infrastructure, but also impacting water quality, and also increasing sedimentation behind reservoirs. Here in the Southwest, our reservoirs are really our lifeline when it comes to water supplies. We collect the water when water is plentiful, and we have wet winters, and we use it in times of drought or in times when there's not as much water on the landscape. And so when you fill up your reservoirs with sedimentation, you're really hurting your ability to store water long term, which is a really great concern for us and our customers. So we took the bold step in 2019 to approve a forest health goal to help support the thinning of forest thinning across 800,000 acres by 2035. And this has really been our North Star in order to accelerate the level of restoration that needs to occur across these landscapes to meet the level of the challenge that we're seeing. But since Salt River Project is not the land manager, it requires us to work with a number of different types of partners across these landscapes in order to actually achieve that scale. So since early 2019, we've been able to reach over 20 plus partners. We have a handful of different type of implementing partners. Those are the partners that actually oversee all the forest projects on the ground that we partner with them. So those include like the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, our state forester, or like the National Forest Foundation. We also have a really incredible portfolio of funding partners. So Salt River Project not only acts as a funder for projects on the ground, but we also are like a connector where we are able to leverage not only our funding, but we can leverage other partner funding to the table. And when we do that, we can actually accomplish far more in many projects across the landscapes by bringing other people to the table and having a greater impact. Some of the partnerships that we have are with federal agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Reclamation. We have long-term commitments with state and local governments as well. We have incredible partners in the conservation space and nonprofits and foundations. But my favorite customer or my favorite partner is actually the Salt River Project customers, where we actually have two customer programs. One that's aimed at like our everyday electric customers, where they are able to provide donations on their electric bill every single month. And we combine those funds and invest 100% of those funding in on-the-ground restoration projects. And we also have a program that's dedicated to just our corporate customers. And those are like the Googles, the Meta, the Apples, Pepsi, Coca-Colas of the world that provide larger scale investments on the ground restoration projects. And in return, SRP is able to quantify the benefits associated with their investments. And then they can apply those to their sustainability portfolios. And so while we've been over the last 5-6 years, we've been able to really build this incredibly successful and diversified partner network that also brings a very diversified funding portfolio. It wasn't easy. We definitely started very small. We started with one 80-acre project in 2021. And now we've been able to scale up where we fund over 25,000 acres worth of restoration across 5 national forests here in Arizona. One of the pieces that Matt hit on that I thought was perfect was on the risk side of things. We spent a lot of time understanding what our risks were to our business, to our mission of providing reliable, affordable, and sustainable water and power, and incorporating that into our strategy and our partner strategy. The other piece that I really like to hit on is the fact that we've been able to be such a successful model for how utilities can be this incredible hub for innovation and for scaling, that now we are actually branching out and helping other water and power utilities either scale up their efforts or help them kind of just begin in their journey. And so that's been a really exciting opportunity that we've seen a lot of momentum in. And it's actually one of the reasons why Kevin and I get to hang out so much now.
I love it. And Elvia, would love you and Kevin both talk a little bit more about this because you recently released a white paper with Blue Forest with about community mitigation and with through utility-led partnerships. Talk about how that kind of tell us more about that the white paper, the group of utilities that came together, and that other kind of that hub mantra I think, which is spot on. And I am lucky to get to hang out with you now more than once a year.
Um, yeah, so I can take a first shot. We have a small coterie. I don't know if that's the word of utilities that are I'd say the vanguard of thinking along these lines and seeing the value in investing in broader resilience. And so we've been benchmarking with each other and saying that that there's a lot here, but these are slow moving industries that aren't built to do this. So how do we transform our companies to lean into this, and then also make the water warm for other utilities to want to jump in too, and ultimately I think try and even get to the point where regulators are starting to demand this of utilities too. First step is to help people understand what's the opportunity and how much you get at it, and so that was kind of the purpose of this white paper was to put a few of our different. There were four utilities and two nonprofits that contributed. Our two organizations, Idaho Power, Liberty Utilities, and also National Forest Foundation and Blue Forest. And so it's just how we've been kind of coming at this from different angles, but there's a convergence, I think, across how we're looking at it. So they trying to capture that and demonstrate there is a business case here. Elvie, please add on what I missed.
Yeah, I think that the work that we've been able to do is made a very strong business case for not only the power sector, but also the water utility sector about the return on investment on investing in either off right away forest health or watershed level scale forest health. It's a very clear return on investments in either the avoided cost or on the environmental benefits of like increased water resiliency, reduced wildfire smoke and the health effects associated with that. And so I think what Kevin and I are trying to do is really just try to get the word out about how more utilities should be incorporating forest health into their business strategies, how to communicate the return on investments and how they can leverage their partnerships and their funding with other partners to really get at the scale of the challenge that they're facing in their local communities.
Love it. And I'm just going to transition straight into Q&A, and I'm going to invite Jenny and Matt and Hillary and all of you to please chime in on all of these topics. But I think especially relevant, a question from LACPA around what governance models have proven most effective for cross-sectoral wildfire partnerships, especially when balancing utility priorities with ecological and community goals like Blue Forest. So Elvie and Kevin, will let you start, and then please others jump in.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. I think the model that we typically use most is the memorandum of understanding that outlines the roles, the responsibilities, and the goals of the parties that are involved. I think one of the key aspects to that kind of MOU framework is really about the long-term commitment. So we are not making one-off commitments or one-year commitments. We're making 5-year, 10-year commitments to our partners, to our communities, into this work. And I think that is really what is needed to get at that scale, because then you can really engage in that long-term planning and that long-term funding pipeline and planning of those projects to get them in order. So I think that has been the most powerful tool for us to date.
Yeah, and to be totally candid, Salt River Project is years ahead of PG&E on this topic. So we've been actively trying to learn as much as we can, the insights that SRP's already put together. So we have one county where we're trying to basically piloting a resilience fund and want to see if others are able and willing to join in to kind of work with us at this kind of county level scale. But frankly, we'll probably be expanding to more counties, and I'm not sure they're all going to have a resilience fund. In some cases, there's a structure that's already being put in place by a county that we can just kind of drop into. But the way I would think about it is it's almost kind of a negotiation. That there are some areas where we really want work done and we're willing to just pay for it. In other ones where maybe we get some value, but not a huge amount of value. But so there's some value to it. We chip in some amounts, but we need partners to come in Also, if utilities can, we can provide some match. We might be able to crowd in more funding by virtue of our match kind of being there too. So I think it's upon us to really get a sophisticated view of what we think the nature of the risk is in a given place, and then how valuable is it to our customers effectively to see that risk taken off the table. The other challenge is that even if there's high risk, if you don't have good partners or community buy-in, it's probably going to be you're pushing on a string at that point. So where is that combination of risk that can be addressed, a good business case to be made, and active, strong partners and community buy-in on the ground. And to me, where those line up, that's going to be, I think, where we'd start.
Can I jump in and build on a
Please,
couple of
yeah.
those? So, just on the point about that Ellie made around MOUs, I think it's so worthwhile given the sort of upfront conversations that happen that people can sort of think about blocking and tackling and the different strengths that different parties bring to the work. So investing in that upfront conversation to be able to come up with an MOU then lets the pathway for that longer term relationship to be effective. But then on Kevin's point too, I think the other opportunity is just thinking about, and of course I'm coming from a philanthropic standpoint, but I think local community foundations that are within the community already, that are often the trusted partners on the ground, can be real allies in this work. And so I would point, for example, to the Tahoe Fund and the work that they've done. Hopefully, many of you all have seen the playbook that they just put out there, and sort of just being on the ground and knowing the players, knowing the relationships that already existed there, and being able to translate the prioritization and what needed to happen with the relationships that exist, and working within that structure. So I think they're an example where this has already happened, but local community foundations, I think, are tired of having to always be on the front lines for response and recovery, and are keen to be allies in thinking about prevention and mitigation, and engaging in that work with everyone.
Love that. Yeah, Hillary, I definitely want you to jump in here too.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that, and then I also want to bring up a context around financing. I really government has largely been siloed. You got federal, state, local, similar, I think financing and funding tools have also been siloed. And I think what's really exciting, and the Blue Force is an example, because we had one in Washington State where we had the local public utility district, we had the county saying we've got a crisis. A majority of the land that is most at risk is federal and state. And each one was working in its own little silos of trying to do protection, until frankly, Blue Forest sort of came in, because everybody goes, how do we fund it? And how do we fund it across jurisdictional lines? Because there's so many laws around that. And it actually got those entities together, like Elvie's talking about, to really say, here's our role, here's our part, here's the financing tool we can bring to it, all the way down to small forest landowners and cost share programs that can come out of the state level, to the local fire districts doing the work on the ground with funding they have. And I think that kind of context, and Jenny bringing up like the work that local community foundations can do as actually lifting it up and working across, is key. I want to actually just add one element, just because financing, I mean, is the big issue, right? We've got, our state, Washington State's facing budget deficits. Many states are facing this crisis around budget deficits. You've got federal funding that's in flux. We're hoping more is coming with their Fix Our Forests Act and elsewhere, but it's still been the largest issue for real sort of progress. And I think there was two things that we did early in Washington that really sort of lifted up this opportunity around funding that gets to when states, local governments, federal funding does this, right? And that was a revolving loan fund. We did a revolving loan fund for all of our shared stewardship, good neighbor work on federal lands, and we did a revolving loan fund for all work on state lands. Now you have to keep those separate because of laws, but what it did is actually first brought a sort of an entrepreneurial spirit to this context of forest management and forestry and restoration, to say we are coming at it from not knowing if we're going to get funding, but thinking about how we don't have a choice, we have to do this work. And it really helped build up a pretty large supply of money very, very quickly, that actually got a pipeline of wood products that started supporting the mills, started to support an ecosystem of funding that goes to say that if, we all know Inflation Reduction Act was a real fast injection, but it also pulls back, right, at different moments in time. Same with our state, 1168 just got cut in half, right? those revolving loan funds give you a longer term financing solution that can support the ongoing work because it's not a one-off. It's got to be something that's for stewardship for the long term. And I think coming up with more of those financing tools at the state and federal level and local level is going to be key.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the theme of that long-term patient capital and those partners that can bring that. A couple of questions in the chat around the federal policy environment, and you can maybe, Matt, address the funding pieces from Fix Our Forest, but also how does Fix Our Forest, think about technology and private sector investors from AI, and what other agencies and private sector partners are going to have access to those kind of the innovation pieces that you talked about through FOFA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to see it was David Green who asked it. And thanks, David, for all your work helping us think through the structure of some of these bills in the early phases. Fix Our Forest Act is an authorizing bill. It's not an appropriations bill. And so the funding fight will come. Our great hope is that, there's bipartisan fatigue for spending on these programs right now, in part because we got this huge injection of funding without a comparable increase in output in the actual work happening on the ground. So we got this big increase in resourcing in the Biden years, and the agencies just weren't really prepared to spend it effectively. A lot of really good work happened on the ground, don't get me wrong, but it was about 2x the work that we do a year on the ground, not something proportional to the increase in funding. And so our hope is that we're building trust here and that this is a system that people believe can take more resources. To answer the question about the private sector versus other actors in the mix, when we look at the planning and permitting, that's mostly work that's going to be done by the feds for the most part. What it does is it builds in a process in how we assess fire sheds that are going to be eligible for these streamlined pathways to get projects on the ground. And that brings in tribal and state consultation in a more formal way than currently exists, which we think is really critical. And then getting into the, other piece for state role is the modernization of Good Neighbor Authority, which Hillary talked about, is going to be an essential tool for states to be able to do work on federal land that's relevant to the states that the feds are not taking care of, something that Hillary did phenomenally well in Washington. And then the last piece on technology, and this is where it's, I think, most relevant to the private sector, is, we secured a lot of changes to both the Intelligence Center and to the Fire Innovation Unit, which is the test bed pilot in Section 303. Those really have a clear mandate for the government to look to private sector solutions and off-the-shelf commercially available technology. I think one of our concerns with government systems is you don't want to see the government, like we've seen in a lot of states, take on a 7-year project to build their perfect model and then just announce it to the world. And by the time it's out there, it's obsolete compared to a lot of the really good work already happening on the ground, right? And so there's a clear mandate for the center to go with off-the-shelf commercially available technology. And our hope is that they will use a range of sources and will serve as an entity that can provide a range of different analytics to decision makers on the ground. And with the pilot as well, what we've done is a pathway from what was originally a bill focused on piloting new technology to a recognition that the technology is here. A lot of it is already getting proven. What we need is a pathway to scale and get the right technology in the hands of decision makers. And I think that's a point Jenny touched on earlier, which is we don't just want tech randomly thrown at people. You don't want a forest supervisor who has no expertise in tech procurement making these decisions on the individual forest level in a way that's not strategic. And so our hope is that we'll be able to bring in innovative tools in a more strategic way and scale them rapidly. And then the last piece on AI, there are a lot of different specific call outs to making sure that they're enabling AI and leaning into the potential there. I mean, there's the data collection side, and then of course on the processing side, what we can do with AI is really incredible right now, and so we want to make sure the government's positioned to utilize that. And I will say, the last point on this, we've been getting a ton of interest from the technology community outside of wildfire because they see this as a potential vehicle to prove themselves in the government space in areas that it is something that is new in government that gives them an opportunity to showcase their potential in defense and energy and healthcare and all these other things. So that's a good sign.
Love it. I know I could do this all day, but we only have 5 more minutes. So I'm going to do a speed round for this last question. And this is a hard one to do a speed round on, but I'm going to challenge our panelists. Um, what's the one most underused or undervalued lever for overcoming the challenges of implementing large-scale fire mitigation and forest restoration?
Upfront capital and consistent financing and better risk analytics. I'll just be redundant.
Love it.
I'll try to be just as quick. I would say gathering the data consistently that we need and then using it for modeling to identify and prioritize the prevention and resilience investments that will really mitigate risk.
I would add that sportsmen and wildlife conservation organizations are incredible partners. We come at it from very different perspectives where they're caring more about habitat and we care more about water infrastructure and water supplies. And together we have the same end goal. And when we put our heads together, we can really accomplish more work together than separately. So I would say utilizing our conservation and recreation stakeholders more.
Love that.
Maybe an unheralded one, maybe it's heralded. When you do all this forest restoration work, where does the wood go? I think that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Right. Hillary, I'm going to give you last word.
I mean, I'll just finish having been like literally on the ground trying to build this from the ground up at a state level in the midst of like fire is I think it's actually the ability to think big. I think we play small ball. I think we operate, and when I say we, in a way, I'm talking about at a government scale, right? But I think we can play this out across that when fires hit our state, when our fires hit our community, no one's saying, I give up. I don't think we can do this and walk away. And I think that we have got to move past this sort of sense of fear and also thinking that hopelessness and it's impossible. It's too big a scale. The problem's too impossible and walking away. We don't have a choice to walk away. And if there's anything that's underutilized and undervalued is that sense of fearlessness, taking risks and having hope.
Here, here. And I know after this 58 minutes, I have even more hope that this issue is something that can and will face head on with this fabulous group of partners, this fabulous growing coalition of innovators, of policymakers, and more. So, more from us at Forest Plus on this conversation, on some deep dives. You can look for a recording of this webinar with some additional resources, including the fabulous work from on the white paper from the Tahoe Fund, from some other places, and then some deep dives that we're planning on in some certain places around the country over the next year that we're going to continue to roll up our sleeves and use our convening power to continue to lift up these innovative voices and folks. So join me in thanking our panelists. This is like a really brilliant discussion. So thank you for the time. Thank you all for making time out of your day to be with us. We'll be following up with you next week with more information and look forward to having you all part of this conversation on an ongoing basis. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Bye.